Hi there, Glocal Citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, and this week, the beach has been in heavy rotation in my mind, so I decided to recreate the experience of being there through conversations with guests from a favorite beach destination, Jamaica. We're revisiting conversations with fellow Stanford alum and techpreneur Stacy Kirk, logistics, supply chain, and production systems expert Andray McKenzie, ceramic sculptor and art therapist Beverley Watson, intelligence advisor, author, and speaker Suki Fuller, global lifestyle ambassador Morri Sinclair, talent development visionary Natasha Moore, and Black feminist researcher, writer, and curator Nydia Swaby. Jamaica, here we come.
I started my own company of one, and over those couple years, I added a few people here and there as my clients said, do you have any more people that can do what you can do? And then I started to realize that I had this bright idea that wasn't a bright idea. It was actually a crazy idea. I thought, you know what? I'm a mother with 2 children. Maybe if I hire enough people to work for me, then they can do all the work and I can work less. I can work less and I can spend more time with my children. So that was my not so bright idea, because as I grew with people, so did the responsibilities as being their leader also increase. But I found that because I chose Jamaica, and I chose Jamaica, many people think because my father's Jamaican. No, I'm a much, and they go, oh, you must be Jamaican. That's why you chose Jamaica. And I said, no, I'm much more of a shrewd businesswoman than that. Jamaica is the third largest English-speaking country on the Western Hemisphere. It shares time zones with the majority of the United States. English first language, and software developers were probably 30% of the salary of a United States software developer. That's why I chose Jamaica as the place. But as I hired and I built the team with a culture like I'd never experienced in America, one that's actually not at your throat, not the crabs in the barrel, but everyone lifting each other up, I realized that even though I didn't have more time with my kids, I finally found my passion in life. I always wanted to figure out, how does computer science tie in to me helping the world? And it never made sense until I expanded my company to Jamaica and had an opportunity to work with some of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my entire life, and give them the knowledge, the courage to let the world know that they exist and that they are an expert. My life is fulfilled every day because of what I do with my team there, and what we do even broader than our company here in the United States and all across the world.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that part of your story, just that you found the uplift in, people who could be invisible otherwise. And that's a lot of what brown people around the world are, is invisible and with the skill set. So let me ask you this, like living in Africa, one of the challenges that we have, Ghana is also English speaking, doesn't share those time zones. But in terms of the work culture, and also a former British colony, in terms of the work culture, how did you go about, I guess, kind of acclimating yourself to setting these different standards? Because I think, the idea that it's more laid back is something that often happens. The sense of urgency is something that may or may not be there. Here in Ghana, we have infrastructure issues with power, roads, that type of thing. What were some of those types of challenges that you may have confronted in order to get to this solid team and this solid morale in place with your team there?
Well, I think Ghana and Jamaica have a lot of similarities. Infrastructure, the salaries or the depressed salaries for the people that work there. It was not easy creating a company in Jamaica, building a company in Jamaica. But I think what has made us successful is that I did not use a blueprint of the colonizers. I did not use a blueprint of how the white world has come into our countries and our places and say, this is how it should be. I realized that as people, especially people that have had so much taken away from them. We learned special skills that I think is at the core of what innovation and technology is about. We learn to be hustlers. We learn how to make do with what we have. We know how to problem solve. And these are
very
real,
true.
not
Mm-hmm.
what type of shoes am I going to wear today? These are, how am I going to pay 5 bills with half the money that I have? And those skill sets may not have always been valued in how they can help build the technology of the future. For me, I found myself hiring people that went to a university in Jamaica that wasn't for the richer kids. It was for the kids that came from humble beginnings and had to push and fight to get to where they were. And I found that when I interviewed them and I asked them the questions that I asked in my interview, which is known to be one of the hardest interviews in Jamaica, the what I look for isn't, can you tell me how to code this line of code? I ask questions like, here is a really tough problem, and you are the only one that can solve it. Solve it. And I sit there and I make them squirm in their chair to figure out how they're going to solve it. But us as a people, and this is from Ghana to Jamaica to the United States, we have something very special in that we can be in a tough situation and find our way out. And so, what I think at the core of the company, coming back to your question, the core of my company is we all have this entrepreneurial spirit that doesn't need to be squashed. And most corporations, they don't want you to do anything but what they say to do. The foundation of our culture is, I'm going to make you into your own boss. I'm going to make you into an expert, because our culture is about entrepreneurs. So I'm going to make you your own entrepreneur. I have a very flat organization, and I let people know, you're not going to bring everything to us. The British style of education, the British style of work is very much do what your boss says.
Yeah.
And so when I came and said, you're the boss, it was a total mind shift, and not everyone could get it, especially if you've been in it long. I'll say we have a lot of young people that are coming out of college where their mind is still open to, I can be my own boss. But once I was able to get them excited about who they could be and who they really are, everything else was just relationships. If you're in any country and you're having problems with infrastructure, you got to have a friend. And you got to have a friend that works here. You got to have a friend here. And so, because of, even though I didn't grow up in Jamaica, I have a lot of ties in Jamaica from friends here and there. And I called on all my friends. I called on the people that knew my mom or my best friend's sister's uncle or my, my son's daughter, and I asked for their help. And I asked for a lot of help from as many places as I could. And it was incredible how, as a community, and this is part of our culture, our community comes together when you ask for help and you're trying to do something good. And so it was really hard, but it was very fulfilling. And then there's some people that sometimes you got to tell them what's in for them, And not everyone is just going to do it out of nature, but that's part of business. Help with finding people that you can connect with, either spiritually, emotionally, on a community side, or sometimes financial side, to get it done.
In Jamaica, one of our sayings is always saying that we're little but we're talawa. It's part of that, because they say you're small but you're powerful, right? And I think in terms of, you'll hear that from a lot of persons who saying, look, you don't have to be well endowed, have the most resource, have the most in it, because most of I can say most of, but certainly a lot of those Jamaicans who get to higher heights, and in terms of, if you look at it, a lot of those persons come from humble beginnings, I mean, if you look at it, people always talk about Bob Marley, but Bob Marley was in the ghetto of Trenchtown in Jamaica before he became this global superstar. But it really speaks to that. If you need to recognize that despite your own local challenges and the lack of resources, you can, by through applying yourself, become bigger than what you are in terms of, and become part of that global experience and how you engage in terms of go out there. And when you're engaging persons, because when I go out and I'm engaging persons from New York or parts of the US or in the UK, about Medicanja, I'm not projecting that, hey, we're from Jamaica, and in terms of we're projecting that, look, this is what we can do and this is what we're going to do in terms of what is that. And I think that is part of it. But certainly from Jamaica, our culture is very strong. And I think in terms of that, I listen to a lot of reggae music, but certainly also in terms of dancehall, part of it in terms of the energy. And it depends on the mood that I'm in or what I'm trying to achieve. I will listen to. So there are times when you need more energy, and yeah, I'm just there in terms of playing in the background. But certainly, traditionally, I would certainly listen to like Buju Banton in terms of, and even a lot of the African mix is very popular
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
in terms of the Jamaican mix in terms of having that experience.
Yeah.
But certainly, I would say that phrase resonates with me in terms of Little But Little, because it connects you, and you can see how that becomes part of a lot of persons' global experience. If they're saying, you may start it out in one area with limited resources, or coming from a humble beginning,
Yeah.
but there's no limitation in terms of how you can end up engaging other persons and being able to be part of those global conversations.
Nice. Nice.
So yeah, so.
Yeah. I like that. It kind of dovetails with my mindset hack question. So, since we're on that track, let me ask you that. So, what is your favorite or innovative mindset hack? This is one that you already practice or one that you can imagine.
Well, I certainly, in terms of the mindset, I said I use music sometimes to get me in the zone.
Okay.
But all right, but I have this, and again, I remember I think it was in 2010 or thereabout. I was part of a group that was sent on a breakthrough intensive as part of a leadership training program, working with as part of the IGO at the time. All right. At the time, we went through this, you have to get to know yourself, know in terms of, and one of the things after that program that I started doing and I recognize is it comes back to connecting to my understanding your why. Why do you want to do this? All right. And if you can connect that to why is it important to me, then I really don't have a challenge motivating myself to do it. But certainly in terms of when you're in that slum or sometimes you're like, oh, do I really need to get out of bed to do this? It is a situation where I usually look at it and say, okay, all right, if you don't do this, what is the, how is it? And I beat upon myself more than anybody else. And so I would say, okay, well, you made a commitment, to do this, So even looking at this, the cannabis industry, and I say, wow, before I came in, I didn't envision this kind of challenge, because there was so much hype on some of the things around it. You figure that, yes, it wouldn't be perfect, but you would have had a smoother road or a less bumpy road to travel. But one of the things that you have to look at is that, and how I look at it is that I made a commitment to do it. And it's one thing in terms of making a commitment. And if you have to be able to look yourself and say, okay, did I do my best at it? Because if I believe I did my best and it's real, I am fine with moving to the next thing. I'm not that type of person who just look at it and said, okay, fail. Because no business, no organization achieve the heights without people taking a chance and people trying to push people to pushing their boundaries, their personal boundaries, to say, can I achieve that? And if I achieve this, how do I go to high heights in terms of what is there? And it's part of that. Usain Bolt could have quit racing from when he did Beijing, but no, because there were more records to be broken, and it's part of that. You have to be able to challenge yourself and to say, hey, how do I get to a higher level or to achieve more out of it? That part of it, and it's part of also that transition. You say, okay, I didn't believe that in terms of it was something going to be phenomenal, continuing in corporate Jamaica in terms of doing that. And which is why I said, okay, it's not about wanting to leave or being upset with persons. It's a matter of saying, how do I go to something else that is going to motivate me and challenge me? And if I can see that, then I am usually able to make that connection to say, okay, you must do this. And I will tell myself all the time, I said, you have to do it. You already made a commitment. Okay, what's the next option? This is what you want to do.
Sure.
And so, yeah, but I know in terms of there are lots of mindset, but that's to me how I sort of must do it. And I'm more of a long-term person than a short-term. So I don't really judge myself on short-term failures or gains as such. But I mean, look at it, okay, what is it that I'm going to achieve within this time frame? And if I can see that journey continuing, then I can say, okay, yes, it's a setback to today, but it's, we'll find a way to get around this, or that create an experience to deal with the next obstacle.
My first interest or connection to art was, there was a very big rock or wall in the back of my house as a child, like a sheer cliff. And my house stood on the base of that. And as you looked at the wall, you would see layers of different kinds of soil. And as a child, I was fascinated with the layers. They were in beige and creams and striations of orange colors going through. And I would dig it out. I had the desire to dig this out. And I noticed that the texture was very chewy and soft.
Did you
not
taste
quite. I didn't taste it. I was smart enough not to taste it, but it was actually very interesting, and I was fascinated by this texture in my hand, and I would spend days playing with it. And as years went on, I never touched clay again until I was about 18 and wanted to go to college to do art, and so I attended Jamaica School of Art in Jamaica for 1 year.
And where is that?
That is in Kingston, Jamaica.
Okay.
At that time, it was the only art program that they had on a college level in the Caribbean islands. So many other colleagues from other parts of the island would come to Jamaica School of Art to learn to be artistic.
Okay.
So I did that, and I got a scholarship or an offer to attend Pratt Institute in New York. So I transferred from Jamaica School of Art to Pratt Institute, where I completed my undergrad degree in ceramic sculpture.
Okay. And so for my listeners, Pratt is a very well-known school here in Brooklyn. It's a few blocks from where we are right now. Beautiful campus with many sculptors in the garden. So how was your experience coming? So you came to Pratt at probably an interesting, how was your experience? Like, that was your first experience in the US. How did you acclimate yourself?
Well, honestly, when I came, even though I was transferred here, I didn't have the opportunity to begin right away. It actually took maybe 2 years or 3 years from the time I arrived to do that. I worked in the community, I worked in the city, doing things. I was skilled as a stenographer, so I didn't even work in my field. I did that. I worked to save enough money to help me with the process of furthering my education, providing me with accommodation. My parents were not here, I was here by myself. And so there were some things I had to put in place to make that happen.
Sure.
And so when I went to Pratt, it was just a whole new world. It was so different from the School of Art that I attended. Not necessarily better or worse, just different. And living on campus at one point in a dorm was also foreign for me. But it was really exciting. It was a time when everybody was so aware of their culture and their roots, and everyone was so proud of who they were, and playing drums on campus and taking dance classes, and all this Afrocentric awareness and love of self, and communicating with people of diverse cultures and getting to know different people was really a wonderful experience, as well as learning about discrimination that was new to me in this culture.
Right. So that was kind of what I was hitting on, because I know Pratt to be very diverse, actually. When I go around the campus, I see a lot of, students from many cultures. I don't see many Blacks. And so I don't know if that's something that they are trying to address and have been trying to address for many years. But I do know of quite a few Black people that have attended. So how was that, like coming from a culture that you are the majority, and then as an artist, because that's a whole other, space.
This is interesting. Do you really want me to talk about this?
I do.
So here it is. So racism was not something I was familiar with from my country. There were other kinds of disparities between cultures or caste systems and things like that. But not liking you or treating you with respect because of the color of your skin was new to me. It was such a foreign experience and really shocking. However, at Pratt, at the time that I went there, which was in the 80s, there was a diverse and a large population of African American people there.
Okay.
They had the dietitian department, they had the architectural department, and then they had the different kinds of arts departments. There were lots of African American Black people from all over the world who were there. So I didn't feel that I was alone. I could align myself with people like myself. There were some people from my country who had transferred here. They started the year before. I was welcomed and received by them, so I didn't feel cut off or alone or ostracized. I had support system that could prepare me for what was to come.
Sure.
So that made my experience a little more bearable.
Okay.
In the midst of the confusion. Also, I came from a culture where education, like all cultures, is important. But a lot of times the countries that are third world or considered third world is considered uneducated. And the standard of education in Jamaica is very high.
Yes.
So when I got here and I did certain courses like history or some liberal arts subject, I remember once a professor telling me that I plagiarized because he did not believe I was capable of writing the paper. And because I came from a culture where you show respect to elders and teachers, I didn't know how to use my voice to say to him, no, I wrote it. I did say it, but he did not believe me. And so he gave me a C for an A paper because he didn't feel I had the ability as a Black child, a Black student, to write a paper like that.
Wow.
So those were some of my experiences.
Wow. That's not surprising, quite amazing, but you persevered.
I persevered.
Yeah.
I was determined to complete what I started.
Sure.
So regardless of whatever happened, I was really tunnel vision on what my goal was, which was to graduate. Having an opportunity to come to another country to get my education was something that did not happen to any of my 6 other siblings who were left home. And so I had to take advantage of that honor and that opportunity.
I have a really mixed heritage, so you could say the majority of me is from Jamaica. However, with Jamaica, as we all know, we're from everywhere.
Yes.
So you have people that are from India, people that are Japanese, people that are, there's Germans, and these are all sort of weaved into the family history because it is so, people marry in different races, but you're not seen as different race in Jamaica because you're Jamaican and everybody talks patois. So if you talk patois, you're Jamaican. Doesn't matter what you look like. So majority of my family, I would say, just to keep the numbers whole, Jamaican, but we are pretty diverse. The words that people don't like to say when they talk about Jamaicans, like coolie. So that's my grandfather's arm is very much more that sort of Southeastern Asian. And my grandmother is, so it's Jamaican. Nobody hates Jamaicans in the world except for other Jamaicans and other people in different Caribbean islands. So, I'm working on getting a Jamaican heritage passport because pulling out the British and pulling out the American, people, we used to be loved, now not so much.
Yeah, it's true.
But Jamaican passport, people either think you're related to Usain Bolt or Rihanna for some reason, even though she's not Jamaican.
She's from Barbados. Right.
I know, but people don't know. But they always think you're related to Usain Bolt. So it's all good. Or Bob Marley, hey, positive vibes.
Sure. Why not? So that was very interesting that you mentioned as soon as you started talking about Rihanna and Bob Marley, my brain just went away from that comment, which is all good. It's fine. Jamaica is one of my favorite islands. So I'm happy to say, I am one of those who everyone loves Jamaicans as well.
What can I say? It's the culture, it's the food, positive vibes. Because the way we look at life is just, you got to make the best of it. You got to be positive because one life, right?
Right. And why not, why not be positive? There's not a reason not to be. So let's get into a little bit more about so you said you're back in the UK and we obviously have this America in within. So tell us why the where. So how did you come to be living, working and playing back in Surrey? And take us a little bit on the journey that took you from a young woman in the UK to come back to the UK.
Ooh, so I haven't lived in the UK since I was a little girl. So my mother and father My father is a mechanical and computer engineer, and he was pretty bright. And so when he was in school, he got recruited by different organizations, got a job in the Middle East. So he got a job in Saudi Arabia. So my parents, young couple. So we moved to Saudi Arabia when I was little. That was an experience. Not so much that it was restrictive, because back then it wasn't quite as restrictive. But for my mother, I suspect it might have been a little bit too restrictive. Although, from the pictures, it doesn't look that way. And that's not what I remember. But, as a little girl, and I'm a Western little girl, so I'm allowed to run around in shorts or whatever. So it's not so restrictive. But at the time, a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but people may know that at that time, as a young child, my mother was Rastafarian. So
she had locks.
Yeah, so she had locks. She was very much Rastafarian, always covered herself, and I was a Rastafarian little kid with my locks running around. So childhood was really a different experience for me, because a lot of people sort of have their traditional viewpoint of me. They wouldn't know that as a child I was Rastafarian, apart from the fact that I didn't eat pork ever until maybe I was like 35, and I tried it and I was like, what is this? This is nasty. Good call. Should have just kept it that way. Yeah, so childhood, lived in the Middle East, came back to England. My parents divorced because my mother didn't like Saudi. And that was the demise of my parents' relationship. My mother met my stepfather, remarried. My stepfather's in the Air Force, U.S. Air Force. And so that was the European stint, Belgium, all those countries. Then the U.S. stationing at the first place I ever lived in the U.S. was Vandenberg Air Force Base in California.
Okay. Never heard of it.
So it's in Southern California. It's about 50 miles or so from Santa Barbara, and about 100 and something miles from LA. And it's right on the beach. So one of the world's most famous surfing places, Pismo Beach, is right down the street from Vandenberg Air Force Base. At the time that we lived there, it was not quite so famous. Pismo Beach, Halama Beach, those were not famous at the time. And subsequently, they've become pretty well known.
Well known because of surfing culture, you would say?
Because of surfing culture. Yeah, people just searching out different places for really good waves. And, as Santa Barbara and all those places got more developed, people would start going there and be like, wow, this is a good place to surf.
Right. And a good place to stay, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. And, Vandenberg Air Force Base. So, done the Air Force bases, but the family is from Pennsylvania. And my grandfather, side note, we're recording, so tell the story. My grandfather's family, when my grandfather and some of his siblings left Jamaica, so Windrush generation, some before Windrush here in the UK, some went to the UK, some went to Canada, some went to the US. And so we have a very large contingency of great aunts and uncles already in Pennsylvania. When my mother met my stepfather, we already had family there. So it's like, make sure you're not like a cousin.
Right. I can imagine.
That's one of the problems with living here in Surrey, just outside of London, is I have a lot of cousins. The family's huge. My grandfather was one of 19. And those were like 19 half brothers and sisters. Those were like two people. My two great grandparents had 19 kids.
Wow.
I've always wanted to come to Ghana ever since I was a kid, after doing a display many, many years ago when I was a kid. And I could find all the countries that were represented in Jamaica except one, which was Ghana, and I couldn't.
Really?
At that point, yes, I was doing a display on children across the world, and Ghana did not have an embassy in Jamaica at the time. And they still don't have an embassy in Jamaica.
Right.
I think there was South Africa at the time. Anyhow, a friend of mine lives here. She is married, Jamaican, married to a Ghanaian, and and she came here probably about 20, 25 years ago. So I really came to visit her. Then I saw the opportunities, I saw the similarities to the culture, the art, and the people in Jamaica, and I really began to make that connection, and it just became stronger and stronger that I needed to live here, move here, work here, and just be here.
So I took my first trip to Jamaica last year. I was there for about almost a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
which was a lovely experience. I love Jamaica. And so I can kind of see what you're saying about how it touched you, because I felt very similar about Jamaica. I was like, wow, I feel like home here. I just felt like, and when you say you didn't really see Ghana in Jamaica, I'm like, but I saw it every day, you know, like the representation. But because I'm a Ghanaian, I guess that's how I was able to make those connections.
Well, yeah, I mean, I see Ghana in Jamaica. When I say I didn't see Ghana in Jamaica every day, meaning I didn't see a representation of Ghana in terms of an embassy.
Okay.
No, I saw Ghana in the culture and the people.
Okay.
I just didn't see that there was a physical mission there for representation of Ghana, like an embassy.
Sure, which makes sense, because that's what you then became, is this kind of cultural ambassador. So the idea of an embassy really was very current in your mind then as it is now.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So my next question is our Glocal Speak question.
Okay.
So you spent time here, and I like to know what you hear. So I asked my guests to share a word, phrase, or saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience, and why or how you came to value it as Glocal Speak.
You know what? I think that the word Sankofa, which is one of the Adinkra symbols, which also means go back and get it, or basically in more modern speak, if you don't know where you're coming from, you can't get where you're going. So I feel that that is really the word that I can relate to. I've always heard that expression in different forms in different parts of the world I've traveled to. And I think it really began to resonate here, or pardon the pun, but it hit home right here. So that's really what resonates well with me. And I feel that everybody who is of African descent, and as the president quoted Peter Tosh saying, as long as you're a black man, you're an African.
Yes.
I think everybody should make a journey to come to Africa.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. That is truth. I like that. Okay, so you told us a little bit how you came to be, but tell us more about exactly what you do here, because you're doing something that's amazing in my mind. It just really kind of puts it all together with the journey. We're now in this year of return that's coming to an end, but hopefully it's only the beginning of something that really is a dynamic gateway for, as you say, all Black people, all that are African, to be and be part of.
Yeah, well, the first thing is that Jamaica is a household name in tourism anywhere you go in the world. And me being here, people love Jamaica because of the music, because of the culture, because of everything, the sports, the athletics, and they have Jamaican flags all over and all the public transportation. Many of them have the Jamaican flag on the back of their trotros, the minibuses. And I just felt Jamaica everywhere. And I feel that what I do here now, I really connect that. The first thing that I did was at Cape Coast Castle. I was part of a huge project installing 1,300 sculptures by sculptor Kwame Katabamfo inside the dungeons in the castle. The sculptures were of Akan heads, which were symbolic of memorial symbols for the ancestors from way back in the day. That was curated by a Fulbright scholar, Danny Dunson, and I put on the event and the entertainment part of it. And that really began to be a major tipping point for cementing my reason to be here. Over 400 people came to that exhibition opening.
I was sad I missed it. I was in the U.S. at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, it was,
And then after we pulled off that, first of all, people really don't leave Accra to go to Cape Coast for an event. And we suddenly had all these people getting on buses and driving to Cape Coast from Accra, from all of the, I would say, more upscale neighborhoods. They left their homes and they came up to Cape Coast. And, you know, people from all walks of life came, and it was really great to see everybody together. And then people began to feel, and I also began to feel, that my calling was to bring people together. So I started doing that. So what I really do now is I often bring people together at parties, events, and I began to turn that into a business. So now I am an event planner. I put together corporate, art, social, and entertainment events that are relating to bringing people together from the diaspora for different reasons. Networking, business, purchasing, selling art, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But tell us more about the Jamaica Ghana initiative.
Okay.
Yeah. First of all, I'm looking at the logo and I love it. 2 thumbs up with the Jamaican flag and a Ghanaian flag. I love it.
Yes.
And tell us more because you've done some things so far.
Well, Jamaica Ghana Initiative is something that I put together like a manifesto that came up. It's jaghana.com, jaghana.com. Anybody can pull that up and see that manifesto.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah. So what that is just a sort of 50-year manifesto from 2019 to 2069, just outlining the steps that I see how Jamaica and Ghana can collaborate, can work together, can reconcile the missing part of their togetherness from when Ghanaians were taken across the Atlantic. Many of them ended up in Jamaica. So just for that connection to be made again. Also, we recently were able to get the visa requirement for Jamaicans waived, so now Jamaicans are welcome to come to Ghana with no visa required. Of course, unfortunately, you still need a visa to go through the US or the UK or Europe in order to connect to the two countries. So that's one thing that we're also working on, somehow getting direct flights that connect Ghana and Jamaica as both gateways to the Caribbean and Africa, respectively. That way we can not have to depend on going through any of those other countries. We can bring cargo, passengers, all that, open up lines of trade, open up the tourism, avenues of tourism. And this also is a development manifesto as well, to create socioeconomic wealth, create socioeconomic growth in both areas through tourism, through many different things, but primarily perhaps emulating some of the things that Jamaica has done successfully in their tourism industry and emulating some things that Ghana has done successfully in their various industries and bringing them together to best practices of both.
I've also always had a desire and an interest, and you know this from our friendship, that I'm deeply spiritual, and I had an interest in theology. And,
right.
And the truth is, Florence, I had all the trappings, but was unhappy, if I'm being honest. So I had bought a flat in Harlem. I changed my job. I wasn't traveling as much. And when I traveled, it was only to Europe and the places that I really loved. And so the world was great, but I was like unhappy, and I just didn't know why.
Sure.
And just wanting to do something else. And so I remember going to talk to a therapist about sort of where I was, and she said, "What do you want to do?" And I thought, wow, that's an interesting question. And I said, "Oh, I would go back to school." And she said, I remember she was very excited. "Oh, so what would you do?" And there's something about like sharing that piece of going back to school with someone, and that's their reaction. And the reason this is important is going back to my roots in Jamaica. Like, you don't quit a job. Like, you know, going back to school.
Immigrant parents, like, no.
The immigrant parent mentality is you have an apartment and you have a job, and you're going to leave it to go back to why? And then you're going to do
something that's not going to pay you more, right? No sure job.
Yes. And that time I was deeply in my spiritual practice in church, and so wanting to learn more, that was an important part of it. But I was also interested in ethics, like you know, and so going to Yale was a great opportunity to do that. And I also realized that I was at a point in my life that if I was ever going to quit school, that was the moment, in terms of what I didn't have
or pick a
family. Sorry, if I was going to do something else, I didn't have a family. I just had myself to worry about.
Sure.
And so, you know, when I said it to her, she's like, "What would you do?" And when I told her, she's like, "Oh, that's interesting." And I that was sort of the beginning for me in thinking that one, have said it out loud.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's now out there. Yes. And then two, that reaction to it. Because then she said, she said to me, "So how would you do it?" And in that moment, sort of talking through some of that. So that was the rest that they say is history.
Okay. So tell us, but our audience doesn't know what you studied exactly. So tell us what you studied.
So theology mostly and ethics. And I went to Yale and studied for 3 years and had a fantastic time. Just like listen, it was about reading books. I love reading. So it felt a little bit decadent at times because here I was walk away from my job. And it's important to say, listen, it wasn't a fairy tale, right in the middle of the financial crash. Mm-hmm, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm, and so, but yeah, so I went and I studied theology and I left Yale after 3 years with a master's in divinity.
Yeah.
So that was
just and so do you feel like you were able to hit that spiritual or was that the transition and the experience lift you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think so I have another desire to write and reflective writing around the spiritual piece. I think any, education sort of opens you to different ways to explore that. And I think in that way, yes, it certainly did. And introduced me to, So I would say, I don't know if you would have, and this is just me, I don't know if on a spiritual level you'll ever hit. I don't know what it is that you're trying to hit, but I think you certainly can evolve. Right. I think one of my experience after that is, at Yale, the Bible is sort of the most sacred text of my life. And at Yale, it's a textbook.
Exactly.
And there's a way in which one needs to sort of navigate that in a very academic way, but also hold on to my spiritual principle and the necessity that brings, which also brings a different kind of...
That's so interesting because I didn't grow up very religious. My parents are Ghanaian. They obviously both had their religions. We go to church, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't say that I was truly like religious, right? Yeah. And so the first time that I really I always had a Bible around, but the first time I got acquainted with the Bible was as a textbook in university, right? Yes. So there was a class called Society... Society, culture, whatever. It was a freshman class.
Every freshman has to take one.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, one of those.
And that has stuck with me in terms of how I look at the Bible. And so, that's a whole nother conversation, but I see where that sits.
So that was a blessing, but also difficulty too, as I said, because it's my most sacred text.
Sure.
And it's in an institution like Yale, it's then pull apart, and you have to know what you know, and that's where I think this notion of spirituality versus religion is you then have to decide.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Which I think is a good thing for someone who's going into the field, right? Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Nice. Okay, so now I want to know why the where. So you took that pivot, we reversed, now you're moving forward. So why the where? How did you come to be living, working, and playing where you currently live?
Yes, so again, after Yale, so when I was at the consulting firm, I'd been to Australia for a work project, and I think I spent probably a month at one time and then a little bit over a month. And I remember the last time I was there, I thought, I could live here. Mm-hmm. And so, leaving Yale, you've quit your job,
you can go anywhere.
There you go. And actually it's important to say it because I do think the courage to quit my job and do something that I wanted to do. Sort of created this other,
the other you.
Yeah. Well, now what do I do? And I think it was why sort of specifically the March before I graduated, the May, I have a very good friend of mine who lives in Australia. She and I were having, it wasn't WhatsApp yet. So maybe whatever it is that we had, was it Face? Skype, maybe.
Yeah,
Skype. It was we had a Skype conversation, and toward the end of the conversation, just as I was hanging up, I said to her, I should come to. I've always wanted. Literally, I said it in this exact same way. I've always said I want to live in Australia. I should come join you there, and we both why not? Yes, you should. And we got off the phone, but the day I just kept thinking, why not?
Right. Sure.
And I sent her an email and I said, hey, actually, I might explore it because it's March and we're thinking, and I'm graduating in May and having now to think about what I do next. And so she texted me back. She emailed me back and she said, if you're serious, I know a recruiter. And I said to her, yeah, I am serious. And so again, the rest, as they say, is history. I got my CV together. I met with a recruiter, and
that's where you ended in Australia. And so from Australia to the UK.
Yeah. So I worked in Australia, meant to be there a minimum of 4 years. I headed up learning for that and OD for that region. And almost 2 years into that role, the same organization that I was at said to me, listen, we have a role in London. And actually, I was helping them to recruit for the position, for the head of role in the UK. Yeah. And then one Friday morning, my then manager called me, and I had a dotted line to her, I should say.
Okay.
Even being in Australia, because she was the global head.
Sure.
So I had a dotted, and she called, and we were chatting the morning and the evening. I sort of had an offer where over the weekend I had to do a pros and cons list of should I stay in Australia or go to London.
Okay. And
to be fair, I always thought that I would end up in Australia on my way back to New York. End up in London on my way back to New York. So like, I always thought I'd do Australia, then probably spend a year or two in London, and then, head back to New York.
Yeah.
Well, 9 years later, I'm still in London. And to be fair, New York is still in the sights, but sure, I'm not in a hurry.
As a migrant kid, my mom would also often say things like, you have to work 3 times as hard as them. And we know who the them are in that sort of narrative. And I reached a certain point in my mid-30s where I realized that that's actually not true. Like, I can work 3 times as hard, but there's structural racism, there's sexism, there are all these things that become barriers. And so I understand that disappointment of hard work doesn't always manifest into the things that you hope, even when you try your hardest, even when you feel like you've earned it. And so that's something that I tried to draw into my writing around her, is to remember her humanity and to try to draw on my own human experience and trying to narrate that. And that's where I think the idea of the speculative and the imagination comes into the work that I do, And I guess even more than just imagination, it's about feeling. It's about using those types of sentiment and emotional feelings to try to tell her story. And so I think a good example of that too would be when I was in Ghana, one of the things Amy Ashford Garvey did was had a naming ceremony. So when she was a child, let me go back a little bit. When Amy Ashford Garvey was a child, and in Jamaica, she learned from her grandmother that her grandmother had been on one of the last slave ships from West Africa to the Caribbean. And her grandmother was able to tell her the area that she was from, UAben, that she was Ashanti, and told Amy all this stuff. So she, from that point in her life until, she grew up, in years later, the first time she goes, to West Africa is in the 40s. She has this dream of this diasporic return, of this sense of connection, of finding her ancestors. And so for me, it felt to tell that story, I want to almost walk in her footsteps. So I was oh, she had a naming ceremony. She got a new name. She did all that stuff. So I was okay, I will do a naming ceremony. Now, this is a very common thing that people of the African diaspora are getting opportunities to now do, to go back to do in Ghana. Sure. But it felt let me have my own naming ceremony so I can get into that kind of emotions of what that might have felt like for her to have that kind of sense of homecoming, and then use the feeling that I had from doing that and the way they welcomed me and what it felt like to have the kind of ritual and ceremony aspects of it, to be dressed in kente, to think about her having that same type of experience, and use to be able to describe the chills on my body that I felt at certain points, to think about her in that same space. So that's why I think autoethnography has become a critical way for me to write her biography, in the sense of trying to replicate some of the things that she did. I went to that village that she went to. I tried to speak to. I had very amazing conversations with people where her legacy is held in oral histories, even if it's not held in an archive that's at Mancha Palace. The story of her being there was held by the linguist, So there are ways in which I was able to still, but I would not have gotten to that if I was approaching the traditional way in which you might approach biography, which is to go to the archive and look for the source. But by approaching it from saying, let me try to walk through her footsteps, if you will, that allowed for me to experiment with the idea that quite often Black women's stories and our histories and our archives are contained in memory. They're contained in things that are much more ephemeral. It's not always going to be in a traditional archive where you go and it's just records and records and sheets, even though I think there are stuff that I'm fortunate to have collected. But with her story, it's much more about trying to follow her path, if you will, try to be in the places that she is, try to live. I spend time going to the area in London that she lived in, walking up and down those streets, try to imagine what it was like in the 50s. I look at a lot of photographs from where she grew up in Port Antonio, Jamaica as a child. And I'm hoping to go to Jamaica in a bit to visit the area where she would have lived, just to try to use, I guess, feeling and embodiment as a part of the way in which to tell the biographic story.
I like that. I like that. So thinking about place, I want to ask my why the where question. So we know that you ended up in London because of school, but you live in a specific place in London. So how did you come to be living, working, and playing where you live?
That's a very good question. And I think it is very much connected to the idea of being a part of a Black diaspora. So when I first would come to London to visit my partner after we met when I'd come to do research for my master's in 2011, then we were in a bit of a long distance relationship, and he was living in South London, just outside of the Brixton area at the time. And so when we would come, we would often go on dates in that kind of Brixton area. And for me, Brixton felt like Crown Heights or Bed-Stuy, New York. It felt like an area that I spent as a child. It felt, walking through the areas, the kind of Caribbean markets, the Caribbean food, the shops that you can pop into, the presence of hearing reggae and Afrobeats like that. It felt very much like the home that I knew in New York. And it also felt like, it's rich with the kind of history of Black people's presence in this country. One of the stories that even though Black people were present in Britain long before the arrival of the Empire Windrush, one of the stories that you often hear is that after they arrived, many of them wound up living in the Brixton area because there was a housing place in Clapham, which is kind of South London as well, where they could go and get access to certain types of housing. So Brixton became a kind of thriving Black British area because African Caribbean migrants were migrating here, and this is where they could get housing. And so it feels like to stay in this area and be a part of that, like that history, that continued in history of like Black migration, especially at a time where the area of Brixton is going through so much gentrification, and to the extent that Black people who've grown up in the area cannot afford to live there. It feels like I don't want to be another one of those gentrifiers. I don't want to be a part of that as well. But at the same time, I want to be a part of the continuing sense that this is an area that's a Black community. This is an area where Black people settle and live and thrive. And I think the other part of it, in a kind of funny way, we now live a little bit out of Brixton because it's so expensive. It's become so overpriced because of gentrification. We couldn't actually buy a property in the area when we were able to purchase. We were in Streatham, which is just outside of it. But Cobb and I had a joke where we said, that's my partner's name. We had a joke where we said, we have a 30-minute plantain rule where we have to be able to leave our house and come back in it with plantain in 30 minutes. It's imperative. We were like, because that's a food staple. And that's how I know I'm in a place where my people are. If I can walk out of my house and go get plantain and be back home to fry it in 30 minutes, that is a place that's for me. That is a space where I feel like my culture and the way that I want to live is represented. So that's how we decided to buy a property. But it's also about wanting to like live in an area that I think represents the kind of the Black diaspora space that I want to be a part of while living in this country.
Sure. I love that. A 30-minute plantain rule. So just side note, how's your kelewele? Have you mastered a kelewele?
I haven't mastered it. Kabna is the kelewele cook in our house, but I do make the red. I make the beans.
Okay.
And the other day I said to him, "Oh, do you want to like make the red?" He's like, I think we've decided, like how you decided I'm the plantain maker in our marriage. I think you make the beans. Like I just don't make it. You make the best. So it's like, and it's his mom's recipe. But I will say I'm quite proud of that. But I've given up. I've revoked the plantain frying because I've discovered that he's way better at. Plantain is a real art. Frying it is a real art. And kelewele is getting the seasoning to stick to it without it being burnt is also an art.
Exactly. It's very involved. I don't eat fried food, so I have my own roasted kelewele recipe, which is still an art because you have to put enough of, like the nonstick oil on it so that it sticks and so that it still tastes good. But I think I've come up with a pretty good.
Yeah, you'll have to give me that recipe because I also don't necessarily enjoy fried food. And we just were thinking maybe we'll try to do it in our air fryer this weekend. So
okay, yeah.
So you have to give me a recipe after this too.
Okay, I will.
That's going to do it for this episode of Glocal Citizens. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us on this beach tour to Jamaica. Be sure to check out the show notes for more complete details on the episodes and background for each of my guests' interviews. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. That's up to a 5-star review on Spotify, on Apple. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. You get the idea. Let us know how you feel about our content. Until next time, bye for now.